Hi, this is Tammy Reese, and I am attempting once again to do my presentation for the teach-in. I have been trying and not doing very well with it. But anyway, my presentation will be considering James Longenbach's The Art of the Poetic Line, understanding poetic line choices as we cultivate our craft. Now I'm going to try to show the PowerPoint. I don't know if this will work. Here it is. Understanding poetic lines. So we got that far. Alright. So let's begin with the beginning. Rather than discussing symbol, alliteration, meter, or other typical poetic devices, James Longenbach's book, The Art of the Poetic Line, intricately describes how the careful use of lineation causes the reader of poetry to hear the poem as the poet has determined it should be heard. Longenbach states, "Poems are poems because we want to listen to them. Some people have a prominent argument, some poems don't. But all poems live or die on their capacity to lure us from their beginnings to their ends by a pattern of sound." Longenbach discusses the sonic components of various poems. And we're going to take a look at William Carlos Williams' poem. It restates the same sentence 3 times. However, due to the position of the line end, by the way, Longenbach does not say line break. He says line end because there is nothing that's been broken. Anyway, he says that William Carlos Williams restates the same sentence 3 times, and each having a very different emphasis. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. They taste good to her. Due to the word used at the line ending, we hear the emphasis of the word change. It moves from good, from her to good to taste, and each receives emphasis a little different. Among the topics Longenbach discusses are end-stopped and enjambed lines, annotating lines, and parsing lines. Oh, let's go back. Yeah, let's go back. Alright, so the ones that we'll be discussing today are the line stop, as in a period, and 2 types of enjambment, annotating lines and parsing lines. We say that lines are enjambed when we're referring to lines that keep going, that lines that end, that when the syntax keeps going. An annotating line, as Longenbach explains, are lines that cut against the grammatical units, annotating the syntax with emphasis that the syntax itself would not have provided. And then parsing lines do not cut against the grammatical units, but rather follow normal syntactical terms. In my own experience, I've always really enjoyed the work of Edgar Allan Poe. I really like the sound of it. But my education has focused my attention on its meaning, symbolism, and use of figurative language, meter, and rhyme. So, for example, when I look at the bells, hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells, what a world of merriment their melody foretells, how they twinkle, twinkle, twinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, 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 in a sort of rhythmic rhyme, to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tingling of the bells. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells, what a world of happiness their harmony foretells. through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight from the molten golden tones, and in tune what a liquid ditty floats to a turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells, how it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Now let's take a look at the parsing lines and the annotating lines from that one section. The parsing lines here, notice that after cells there is a comma. Oh, from out the sounding cells, comma, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells! Exclamation point, so there's a line ending. But when we have the annotating lines, what we have is the poet pushes us forward, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 etc. So he's only allowing us to have in that whole section there one break because he's pushing us forward. Now let's turn our attention to the relationship between formal choice and ideological position and how those are constantly shifting. If a poet who works in lines feels that her syntax isn't very interesting, abandoning lines may allow her to discover syntactical possibilities that her usual manner of lineation has occluded. And if a poet who has abandoned lines finds that her syntax has grown predictable, then the introduction of lineation may provide a tension that will reinvigorate her syntax. Now I was going to talk a little more about Yeats, William Butler Yeats, and if you start on page 100 and you go through to the end of the book, there's a lovely discussion about the method that Yeats uses or used in his journal. He would start out by writing down his thoughts, and then he moved to where he was not only just writing down his thoughts, but he would stop and go back and think about what he had written. When he wrote these last two poems discussed here, it had been a long time since he had done any writing of any poetry, and he was feeling rusty, and I can definitely relate to that, having not done any writing of poetry for several years myself. But here's the one of the poems that he ended up with. He started out with prose, and this is the kind of thing that helps us as we are reading the poem. It seems like we are writing it at the same time. And that's to paraphrase Longenbach. And so Yeats starts out in his journal, to complain of the fascination of what's difficult. It spoils spontaneity and pleasure, and it wastes time. Repeat the line ending difficult 3 times, and rhyme on bolt, exalt, colt, and volt. So while he's writing down his thoughts, he is thinking about his thoughts, and he's giving himself notes about what to do next. So he's doing this metacognition while he's writing. One could use the thought of the wild-winged and unbroken colt that must drag a cart of stones out of pride because it's difficult, and end by denouncing drama, accounts, public contests, all that's merely difficult. Once again, Yeats is in search of a poem, and this paragraph is the seedbed for the fascination of what's difficult, and this is found on pages 114 and 115. Yeats could hear the poem unfolding before he even knew exactly what it was going to be about. He decided that he liked the way difficult and colt and jolt sounded, and so he used those to write his poem. What's interesting about this poem is that if you take a look at it, he has almost captured a sonnet. The fascination of what's difficult has dried the sap out of my veins and rent spontaneous joy and natural content out of my heart. There is something ails our colt that must, as if it had not holy blood nor an Olympus leaped from cloud to cloud, shiver at the lash and strain and sweat and jolt, as though it dragged road metal. My curse on plays that have to be set up in 50 ways, on the day's war with every knave and dolt, theater business, management of men. I swear, before the dawn comes round again, I'll find the stable and pull out the bolt. So what's interesting here is that he has moved very carefully, putting in his rhymes just like he had seen probably thousands of Petrarchan sonnets. But instead of leaving it in exactly sonnet format, he kept A-B-B-A-C-C-A. He kept that. He kept very close to the poem, to a regular sound of a sonnet, but he made a few changes. He expanded the palette of his rhyme scheme, shifting our ears to a strategically different sound. Yeats also discovers the structure for the poem, one that was familiar to him from thousands of Petrarchan sonnets, in which the first 8 lines, or the octet, offer a proposition on which the second 6 lines, or sestet, turn. But since Yeats has placed his volta, or turn, in the middle of the 8th line rather than at the beginning of the 9th line, where it traditionally appears, his 13-line poem has the structure of a sonnet, but not the form of the sonnet. That is, the poem's argument turns against itself as a sonnet's argument turns, but the proportions are slightly off. The argument does not inhabit the meter, and rhyme scheme is not precisely the same as the traditional form, or is the same as the traditional form. So he kept the rhyme, most of the structure, but left off the form. A poem may harness the power of meter, rhyme, syntax, and line to establish and disrupt a pattern of sounds, and a poem may with equal integrity reject the power of meter, rhyme, syntax, and line. But the poet needs to understand what she is rejecting as well as what she is harnessing. Every poem is based, at least implicitly, on a choice to do something rather than something else, and as a result, every poem takes power from its exclusions as well as its inclusions. And that was from page 120. So now I invite you, let's try some playing around with sounds. Take a look at the next 3 blogs and have a little fun practice. At least I hope you enjoy it. I've enjoyed talking to you.